Today on NewsWatch, special favors. We'll break down the new report that shows Hillary Clinton may have given special treatment to top Clinton Foundation donors while she was Secretary of State. Plus, keeping Israel safe. We'll introduce you to the organization that provides tools to first responders. And they risked their lives to save others and took out a terrorist in the process. Meet the young men who stopped the Paris train attacker and prevented a massacre. Thanks for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Caitlin Burke. More scrutiny for Donald Trump this week on immigration, and the candidate is encouraging it, announcing a major speech in Arizona. And Hillary Clinton has new questions to answer about special State Department treatment for top Clinton Foundation donors. Meanwhile, both candidates can't ignore the economy, as the latest numbers show slower than expected growth this spring. Heather Sells has the latest on the race for the White House.
It may be his signature issue, but the Trump campaign is struggling to defend where the candidate stands on immigration. Last week, Trump showed signs of softening his stance. Now, Trump has announced a major speech on illegal immigration in Arizona on Wednesday. And on the Sunday talk shows, those closest to him on the campaign team defended his position, saying he's been consistent.
No amnesty, no citizenship, no more sanctuary cities.
We're going to secure the border. No path to legalization, no path to citizenship unless people leave the country.
To underscore his tough stance, Trump hit the campaign trail this weekend with the family of a young woman killed by a drunk driver. That driver was an illegal immigrant who posted bond and disappeared.
We will use immigration law to prevent crimes.
On the Democratic side, Hillary Clinton spent the weekend campaigning in the Hamptons in New York with a fresh round of troublesome emails to defend. The emails were released after a lawsuit by the conservative group Citizens United, who shared them with ABC News. They show what the group says is more evidence that allies of the Clinton Foundation got special treatment when Clinton was Secretary of State. But one issue may loom the largest for both candidates: Americans' pocketbooks. The latest government report revised economic growth downward slightly. It's now under 1% for the year. Some economists believe it's picked up in the last few months, but it's still the weakest recovery since World War II, and a stark reminder that the economy has not yet achieved strong, sustainable growth since the recession ended. Heather Sells, CBN News.
Rescue workers in central Italy are searching for more victims of last Wednesday's devastating earthquake. At least 290 are known dead after 6 more bodies were found in the last few days. Much of the town of Amatrice, along with 2 other towns, have been reduced to rubble. Sunday, Catholics in Amatrice held a mass for survivors in a large tent under a makeshift cross built out of 2 firefighter ladders and the helmets of rescue workers. Meanwhile, CBN Disaster Relief is partnering with Italy for Christ to bring humanitarian aid to the region. They're providing shelter, beds, blankets, food, and water for some of the victims. Operation Blessing spent the weekend helping Louisiana residents pick up the pieces after the recent devastating floods. Hundreds of volunteers have helped, and over 10,000 hot meals have been served to victims and workers. The floods nearly destroyed Kathy Alello's home, and her long bout with pancreatic cancer left her too weak to salvage what was left. OB team stepped in to help, and Kathy gives all the glory to God.
God's right there with you, and He will help you out of this situation. And it's only material things.
Operation Blessing teams have come in from all over the U.S. to show God's love in the devastation. They've prayed with people and seen healing and salvation. OB is still accepting volunteers to help people recover from this huge natural disaster. A suicide bomber in Indonesia failed to carry out an attack at a church Sunday. Authorities say the bomber charged a priest at the altar, hoping to detonate the bomb in his backpack, but the bomb never went off. The assailant continued trying to chase down the priest until the congregation finally stopped him. Indonesia is the world's most populous Muslim nation and has suffered a series of deadly attacks by Muslim jihadists. For the past several months, Israelis have suffered a wave of terror attacks. What's critical in keeping the casualties as low as possible is emergency response, and having enough ambulances to do the job. Chris Mitchell shows us from Jerusalem how one organization is helping to provide first responders the tools they need to save lives.
Getting to the scene of a terror attack quickly is critical to save lives. That's why Jesus Ministries donated 3 new ambulances to Israel's first responders, Magen David Adom.
And this is a practical way of showing support?
That I believe is because in my little survey that I did, in one way we can help the poor is by the need for blood donation and medical supplies.
The ambulances will make a difference beyond fighting terrorism.
Each one of these vehicles is providing services to hundreds and thousands of people every year. And by that we can deliver babies safely en route to the hospitals. We can resuscitate elderly people. We can support people with disabilities and then evacuate them under very good medical conditions and supervision to the hospitals.
The gifts demonstrate the growing relationship between Christians and Jews.
The ambulances are an important part of showing to the Israeli people the Christian support and love for Israel. This is one of the most important aspects of the ambulances. It shows to the Israeli people who often feel very alone that we are not alone, that God has brought these Christian people to support us and to lift us up. And this does that.
We're an isolated people. We're people, we're vilified, we're castigated, we're ostracized in so many corners of the earth. At the same time, once you can lift the manhole of the secret chambers, there are millions and millions that are supportive and love the Jewish people. Our job is to open those doors, to prize them open, to keep them open, and to make sure that the Jewish-Christian relationship is a continuing, beautiful, beautiful flower that blossoms and blooms for all the whole wide world to see.
One ambulance driver wanted to pass along a message to the Christians.
He said, tell them that each time I go out on a call, I feel that all of them are with me. And I have the energy to save a person's life and to provide health and safety to the people that I'm called to serve.
In the end times, Israel is going to be left all alone, as we read from the Holy Scriptures. And the only people who are going to stand with them, as it was in the past, will be the Christians.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
The Church of England is looking at a possible split over issues like homosexuality. Representatives of almost a dozen congregations are planning to gather to develop an alternative Anglican church this week. Organizers say they have no immediate plans to break away, but are preparing to do so if the church continues to go down a liberal path. Reverend Sanlon, who is hosting the meeting, said, "My overriding concern is to see the mission of the Church of England effectively discharged. The partnerships to do that are not possible between churches which promote ambiguity about teaching on sexuality." Coming up, what fuels the Trump train, the changing face of America, and what it means for the election, and big issues like gay marriage. Something's happening in America. The nation was founded by European Christians, but according to new numbers, that part of the population is now the minority. Jennifer Wishon explains.
In the time since President Obama was elected, the nation has experienced a dramatic shift.
We've gone just in the last 8 years from being a majority white Christian country to a minority white Christian country. And I should be really clear here, that means if you take all white Christians, so Protestants, Catholics, Orthodox, non-denominational, everyone who identifies as a white, non-Hispanic Christian.
In 2008, white Christians made up 54% of the population. Today, they make up 45%. Here's why. White couples aren't having enough babies to keep up with birth rates of other races and immigration rates. Also, an increasing number of whites, especially millennials, are leaving the church. It's a new reality Robert Jones details in his new book, The End of White Christian America.
And you say that because of this, white Christians are kind of having this identity crisis, right?
And a sense of real anxiety about what this means for not only the church, but what does it mean for the country?
Think about it. During the 8 years white Christians have been on the decline, the culture has changed dramatically. Gender identity issues are impacting schools, Christians are facing unprecedented levels of persecution, and gay marriage is the law of the land.
I do think the issue of gay marriage is a real bellwether issue here. I mean, it's an issue that conservative white Christians in particular were pretty much all in opposing from very early on, from the 70s all the way through. And it's an issue, as you said, that has kind of been lost. It's been lost in the courts. It's been lost in the court of public opinion.
8 years ago, 40% of Americans supported same-sex marriage. Today, 53% support it. Jones hopes his book serves as a guide to the signs of the times. They're the numbers behind the sense that something's different that's being felt across America and is materializing both along racial and political divides. His book isn't about the presidential race, but his findings help explain what's fueling the Trump train.
I think the anger that we're seeing is really rooted more in this sense of anxiety about cultural change and this sense really of nostalgia for a time when conservative white Protestants, I think, were more central to the American story, were more central to American culture, and had their hands, frankly, more on the levers of power.
Nearly 80% of white evangelicals feel Christians are being discriminated against in America. And more than 2/3 believe discrimination against whites has become as big a problem as discrimination against other groups. I mean, we're seeing racial unrest, not that divisions haven't been there, but they've been exposed in a way that I haven't seen in my lifetime.
Yeah, one challenge I think for white Christians is making connections with their black brothers and sisters on many of these questions.
For instance, 80% of black Christians say recent killings of black men are part of a larger pattern of how police treat African Americans. Just 29% of white evangelicals agree. No matter where you fall along the graph, the fact is America's Christians are still mostly segregated.
Now, Martin Luther King was famous for saying 11 a.m. on Sunday morning is the most segregated hour in America. Still today, 90% of churches are essentially monoracial churches. So there's still not as much of that kind of connective tissue between these two worlds of Christianity.
Dramatic realities and shifts that help explain at least some of the angst that's behind the headlines. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News, Washington.
Up next, a terrorist, a train, and 3 American heroes. You'll hear from 2 of those courageous young men right here when we come back. Last summer, 3 American friends traveled through Europe as ordinary tourists. And then suddenly, the world came to know them as heroes. Here's why.
American tourists Anthony Sadler, Alex Scarlatos, and Spencer Stone boarded a train from Brussels to Paris on August 21, 2015. A heavily armed ISIS terrorist named Ayoub el-Kazani was also on board. But when Kazani began to carry out his attack, he ran straight into the 3 Americans who jumped into action, risking their lives to disarm and subdue Kazani and saving hundreds of lives in the process. They tell their story in a new book, The 1517 to Paris, the true story of a terrorist, a train, and 3 American heroes.
2 of those American heroes, Anthony Sadler and Spencer Stone, recently joined us here in our CBN News studio. Our Middle East Bureau Chief, Chris Mitchell, spoke with them about that remarkable day.
Tell us what happened exactly on the train and what did alert you that something was wrong?
Well, Anthony and I were actually asleep at the time, and a train employee ran down the center aisle in between us, and that commotion kind of woke us up. I had headphones on, so I took them off. I looked over at Alec. He was kind of turned around in his seat. Looks like he sees a ghost. I hear glass breaking, people screaming. I look towards the back of the train myself. First thing I see is Ayoub coming through the doorway, shirtless, with a backpack strapped to the front of him, and he's bending down, picking up an AK-47.
Anthony, what was going on with you?
Yeah, initially, as Spencer said, a train employee sprinted by us, and that woke me and Spencer up, and I turn around to naturally see what he's running away from, and as he said, the first image we see is him entering the train car with a backpack strapped to him, and he's also cocking the AK about to fire.
So, Spencer, you knew something was wrong when you saw the gun, obviously, and
yeah.
So what was your initial reaction?
I mean, I think everyone was in shock. There was a second. I kind of looked back and I looked to see if anyone was going to do anything, and no one was. And so I figured, I had no hope that we were going to survive this. I just thought we were going to die right then and there. But he hadn't started shooting yet, so I figured, hey, I'll give it a shot. So I took off and I ran straight at him. I had about 30 feet to cover, but luckily he actually pointed at me, pulled the trigger, and
he did.
He did. The firing pin struck the primer, but it was a bad primer in the bullet. So I mean, it's just another a work of God that was, in that moment that kept us alive.
Yeah. So Anthony, you were right behind Spencer at the time?
Yeah. At the time, I was asking myself, like, is this really happening? When we initially saw the gunman, and within seconds, Spencer had gotten up out of his seat to tackle him, and then once I saw Spencer get up, it was more instinctual for me and Alec just to follow our friend into battles.
So when you got to the terrorist, what happened there?
I tackled him. He, initially hit me with the gun as I ran up to him, blinded me in one eye. I started bleeding. Not a great way to start off the fight. I was able to, scuffle with him a little bit. I do jiu-jitsu, so that kicked in for me. I put him in a rear naked choke, and that's when Alec and Anthony ran up, and eventually we got to beat him up a little bit, and then eventually choked him unconscious. But he cut me in the back of the neck with his box cutter twice, trying to almost slit my throat, cut my left thumb down to the bone, severed my tendon and nerve, and it was just it was a crazy situation, but we eventually just choked him unconscious.
Yeah, but there was another person involved as well. Wasn't there a French man that had already confronted the terrorists before that?
Yeah, we didn't get a chance to actually witness that. We found that out kind of after in hindsight. Right. I think he was waiting for the bathroom as the gunman was loading the weapons in the bathroom. So when he initially first came out, there was an altercation there. One of the passengers, Mark Mugallian, had gotten shot at that point. We still didn't know that because we were in a different car. And then I think that commotion is what caused the train employee to sprint by us, where we saw him for the first time. Many
of these attacks happen randomly. They happen like on a train on the way to Paris, or it could be in Nice, France. There was somebody killed dozens, I think about over 80 people. Do you think this is a lesson for today of how to respond in attacks that may happen, whether it's Orlando or San Bernardino?
I think our story kind of changed the narrative a little bit. Too often in the media, you hear about terrorism and mass casualties. But I think our story provides a different light to that, and nobody even lost life in our situation, including the gunman. So I think it's a blessing, and I think we hope that the readers and everybody in the world, it changes the narrative a little bit, that maybe these things can be averted in the future.
What role do you believe faith had to do in what you did?
100%.
Everything.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, there's just a list of miracles that happened. Even just getting us to that point and having everyone there on the train with specific skill set was just a miracle within itself. It's like we had the perfect people in place, and me and Anthony and Alec all feel the same way. We were destined to be on that train, and everything we had done prior to in our lives led to that moment. And I feel like we used every single skill we picked up along the way in a matter of 30 minutes.
Yeah, and you've written a book called The 1517 to Paris. And in the book, do you think this is another way for people to learn the lesson that people need to know right now?
Yeah, I think it's a good reflection, and I think it's a good tool that is out there and people could use, and we hope that our story provides some hope to people out there in this world today where terrorism is so prevalent, and we just hope that it changes the narrative a little bit.
Spencer, tell us the story about the French man, I believe, who confronted the terrorists, who was severely wounded, and you were able to help save his life.
Yeah, so he'd been shot in the back, the bullet ricocheted around his body, and ended up coming out of his neck and severing his carotid artery. And he had lost so much blood by the time I got to him that I thought he was going to die anyway, even though I had managed to stop the bleeding. And so I told him, hey, do you want to say a prayer with me? And he kind of went, I'm okay. And that took me back for a second. I was like, wow, on the verge of death, and still said no. But then Anthony was above me, and he said, hey, just Spencer, pray for him anyway. And then so I said a quick prayer with him, while I had my fingers in his neck, and 10 minutes later, we arrived at the train station. Then a month and a half later, I was almost killed in my hometown from a stabbing incident.
Right, I heard about that.
Yeah. And
you
so
okay now?
I'm good now. God blessed me again to have a 100% recovery, so I'm good. But Mark actually had texted me while I was in surgery and said, "Hey, Spencer, I know on the train you asked if I wanted to say a prayer, and I didn't then, but I do now."
Yeah.
And so it was just amazing to see that message.
Right. Well, Spencer Anthony, thanks for being with us. Thanks for what you did. Ordinary heroes, but I think it's a great, as you said, Anthony, it's a great way to change the narrative of all the things that are happening in the world today.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. Well, these brave young men's heroic actions are documented in their new book, The 1517 to Paris. You can find it wherever books are sold. And thanks for being with us.
Finally today in health news, you may enjoy one benefit from growing older, getting happier. A recent survey found that overall mental health, including happiness, gets better as you age. According to the Los Angeles Times, the survey found that people in their 20s were the most stressed, while those in their 90s were the most content. Possible reasons include changes in the physiology of the brain or the fact that what is stressful to people when they're young doesn't often bother them as much when they age, as they realize what's really important to them and what's not. That's it for now on CBN NewsWatch. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care about most at cbnnews.com. And tell us what you think about the stories you've seen here. You can do that on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We hope you'll join us next time. Have a great day.